Hello again. I want to talk about something that has basically, well, it's put all my theories of life and this earth and this existence on this plane into one sort of collective idea. And it's a book I recently came across thanks to a friend who posted a video about it on the Hocus Pocus discussion group on Facebook. And the book is called A Cyclonopedia, written by an Iranian philosopher called Reza Nagarastari, I think it's pronounced. It's a work of what he has kind of created. In reality, it's called theory fiction. The concept that fiction can be used to express a theory. Now, we've had ideas like this and things like cosmic horror. There's people like the work of Lovecraft and Colin Wilson and John Wyndham and Nigel Neal, and we've had it in things like creepypasta. The idea that something, although it's fiction, is actually telling us something that may possibly be a truth. Now, in this age of incredible cynicism, and we have all kinds of gatekeepers in the sciences and in the universities, it may be the only way we have left of actually communicating truths that we need to hear, in the sense that if it was published as a scientific paper, it would automatically be struck down. It would be under peer review, and so that kind of thing. Uh, this is going to be quite a deep conversation. It's going to last a while, so I tell you, you need to get comfortable here. But those of us who are in this game of discovery, this waking up thing. Now, I've been in it since I was about 10. So I didn't have that shock moment that people who are invested in the system, they suddenly have, and then they are like their minds are blown. My mind has been blown in sort of like incremental steps over the last 40 years or so. Now, at this at this stage in the game, it's very rare for me to have that kind of, you know, jaw drop down moment, at this point of the game. And when it does happen, it's usually as a kind of a rationalization or a kind of a reimagining of things I already know, overlaid upon contemporary things. So I can look at something like, Quatermass 4 by, Nigel Neal and apply it to things that we see today, cults and so on that are based on climatology and these kind of things. Now, those of you who are aware of my work know that my stuff is pretty out there. This video is aimed at everyone, even people who don't know I exist, which is, countless millions, and very few people know me, relatively speaking. But those of you who don't, my own background is I've written several books since I'm actually originally an artist and a musician that came out of Ireland. And I lived in New York for years. And then I retrained myself, went back to school and studied graphic design and things like that, and ended up working in Wall Street of all places for everybody. And when that all ended, I came back to Ireland and I started writing books. I wrote books on psychopathy, on social engineering, on the occult of the Third Reich, on Druidism, on ancient shamanism on these islands in the context of what the shamanism could have been. I've re-examined historical mysteries, everything from megaliths to the Irish Round Towers. And I've collaborated on books with two other people. So I have been on this game for a long time, and that game being is that the story that we're sold to us by the powers that be is heavily, it's not that everything is a psyop. You see, that's a big mistake that people make when they first wake up. They think that everything is a lie and everything they've been told is a lie. No, some things are true and some things are not true that are handed down from on high. And what is needed to keep you focused and on the middle path is constant discernment about these, because they want you to sometimes believe that things that actually happened didn't happen, or sow doubts about them by putting conspiracy theories out there. Now, I'm not going to go into that now, but this I found the way for me to deal with this was through what this gentleman has done in this book, and that is to take fiction and see the theory of reality inside it, extrapolate a philosophical understanding out from that. Okay. And that's, where I am today, more so than ever, more so than ever. Although even right back to my first book, Puzzling People, I was constantly invoking allegory and metaphor and mythology and this kind of thing. It wasn't just simply just how to deal with like bullies at the workplace. I'm very much drawn on the concept of from my own paganism, that of the sort of ancient wisdoms of the West, of the Indo-European world. Now, before I get into that, I want to talk about some things that have been happening lately that have been remarkable in my life to observe. Now, you see Tucker Carlson in a podcast talking to some gentleman who's a former US military, I don't know the man's name, retired guy or ex-guy, about that he believes that UFOs are actually demons or spiritual beings. And the United States government is under the control of these spiritual forces. And they want you to believe that the things you see in the sky are spaceships from other worlds, because by making them nuts and bolts spaceships, they will take away your belief in the supernatural. Now, I've believed this since I was probably in my early 20s. I came to the conclusion very early on. And ironically, it was true. A relative of mine who had worked in a farm in County Westmeath or Meath in Ireland for the summer as a farm labourer. And the farmer actually told him one night he was coming home and a spaceship landed in a field. And these little fellas in white suits, two of them got out and started examining things. And then the spaceship took off again. And he said, the man was telling me the truth. He was definitely he saw these beings from another world in a spaceship. And I said, how did he describe them? He said, just like the spaceship of the Apollo, the fellas going to the moon. That's how he said, the fellas who went to the moon, the Americans who went to the moon. And then I said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, it was also in a place called the Fairy Field. Now, you see, here we go. This is the thing. Whatever the spiritual force is, and there may be many different layers and different types of it, either we create a rationalization in our brains to try to understand it because we go so deep into the uncanny valley, or the entity behind it creates a kind of facade or an illusion in order to make you believe it's something it's not, in order to kind of win your attention and perhaps harvest your energy through your shock or your fear. And that's why this man, previous to this, had seen the Apollo missions on television. And so therefore his idea of a spaceman was that. And it gave him that, or he perceived it as that. And that's why you get like films about flying saucers, and then you get flying saucers in real life. And it's not that people are they're culturally overlaying it, but they're still having a spiritual experience. And that's just the important part. They're not having hallucinations. They're not having, mental illness. They're having a supernatural event. And either their own brains are rationalizing in a certain way, or it's being presented to them that way to fool them in a camouflage way. Now, I think in many cases, it can be a mixture of both. So when Tucker Carlson says this, and then he says, he talked about how he was locked into the media, locked into the matrix, locked into the conservative world and lifestyle of Washington, D.C. And he suddenly has his mind blown about everything. Like, it's amazing to hear him talking about Building 7 and stuff like that. And, considering his profile and reach. And then he's jumped back into Christianity, even though he came from a very kind of laid back Christian background. He's very much of the idea, though he definitely didn't have a sectarian element, because he did say things like Hinduism and people who believe in animistic religions, people like me, they, in my Indo-European paganism, they all say the same thing, that there are spiritual forces on this earth that don't like humans, and they will trick and damage us any chance they can get. And they will appear as deceivers in all kinds of different ways. So, like, his idea to that is to go back to the kind of Jesus Christ philosophical, spiritual model. And that's okay. Wherever you go is wherever you go. But it's when he says things like it's the true path and the only path. I find it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable considering the history of what's been done to pagan people, and people who are outside the Christian power structures over the centuries. That makes me feel uncomfortable. Having said that, I don't think he has any. He definitely doesn't have any malice in it. Another well-known commentator in this regard is Naomi Wolf. Now, Naomi Wolf has written some great books over the years, and a recent one, well, I think it's the second recent one that I read about the lockdown and the nature of evil. She speculates and has done in videos that it's the pagan gods who are damaging the human race. And she cites Baal. Now, she's coming from her Judaic background. Again, she returns to what she was raised with. And again, I wasn't raised really with any religion. My family, my parents didn't force any kind of really religion on me. So I was able to find my own path, which was eventually to be Indo-European paganism. And so she has this thing that the old gods have returned, and they're basically evil, Baal and Molech. And you have to understand that what we know about Baal and Molech is basically been written down by the Hebrew scribes and scholars in places like the Talmud. And it's very subjective, and it's a lot of it is like Julius Caesar's description of the Druids, which you can't take at face value, Wickermans and stuff like that, and Pilney's views of the Druids, that these were war documents, these were propaganda that were designed to, dehumanize the enemy by saying they do all these awful things. And I'm not saying that these things didn't happen, but a degree of perspective is needed here also. But I'm trying, the Christians and have done their holy wars, and you have jihad and crusade and so on. So no one's innocent in this regard. So with that in mind, a lot of people are coming to this realization all over the world, and there's a huge growth in people returning back to Christianity. And I'm not bothered by that. If that's what you know, that's where you go. Once your heart and your soul is in the right place, I don't have a problem with that. Once you don't start becoming judgmental of people like me, or the billions of people worldwide who are not part of the Abrahamic world. We've suffered enough at the hands of the Abrahamic religions. But at the same time, we've also suffered in other ways too. Now, as I said, this is a long video, and so I'm going to my regular audience. Please forgive me if you've heard me say things I've said before. You know me, I always try in my videos not to repeat myself over and over again, and I try to always avoid that. And I never make a video unless I have something new to say, and I don't play to the gallery. I don't do that. I disappear from weeks off social media or off YouTube and not make a video because I don't want to talk about. I'm not one of these things who personal say this, who read the news back to you or something in their own voice because they have nothing original to say themselves. I don't do that because I make these kinds of videos because I'm having a conversation with you guys that you'll feed back to me through the comments. Because I live in a rural part of the northwest of Ireland, I do have friends around here who do share the same mentality as me, but it's difficult to have a long conversation like this with another person unless you spend a weekend with them or something. So this is what the purpose of these videos are for me. It's my long weekend conversation with you guys. And I'm learning too. I'm not here to pontificate. So, and I think that's okay. I mean, I think a lot of the people who wake up, I have a lot of respect for them when they just basically are asking. But unfortunately, there's too many traps and holding patterns that keep people believing it's this or it's that, or if governments are lying about several things, that means they're lying about everything. No, sometimes they want you to believe certain lies are not true, and certain truths are lies. And so that's the classic espionage thing. If you read my book Sorcery, you'll see the close links between the espionage world and the sorcery world. And talking about theory fiction, Dennis Wheatley, the British occult writer, he was a member of the London Controlling Group, and they were the clandestine occult warfare division of the British military in World War II. So you can see, and then all his fiction, his books, they're basically outlining what goes on behind the corridors of power in this world. And I wrote an article recently on my Substack, which I'll link in below, on his book, the Dracula, no, sorry, not his book, on him and things like him, but also on a movie called Dracula AD 72, that talks about basically wealthy, powerful individuals connected to the British establishment who are ransoming governments with a virus that they will release as a pandemic if they don't get their way. And this is basically stunning to watch now, because that's what happened. And they're serving Dracula, who's an allegory for what I call, well, not I call, those Andy Garcia and The Godfather 3, who came up with the term. Did said it is probably Francis Ford Coppola, the secret unknowns, because they're so unknown that are they even human, or are they humans who are possessed by this power force, or are they? And there's multiple power forces too. I believe that the pandemic was actually some kind of Lovecraftian entity that took an interest in this planet for a while and left. But we've been dealing with ones that exist on this planet, which is what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So it's you can't be simplistic at times like this, and you've got to pull upon. You see, I realize now that regardless of this gentleman's philosophical theory of theory fiction, I've lived my whole life like that, and so many of the things I grew up with have come to pass into reality. And in recent years, and those of you who follow me for a long time, you'll see that, like, where I barely mentioned the work of Nigel Neal or Lovecraft, or I've mentioned Colin Wilson a fair bit back in the old days, now I'm talking about them non-stop, especially since the scamdemic. And on top of that, things like quantum theory seem to be coming much more into the fray with wave function collapses and overlapping realities. And I'm definitely can believe that there's so many strange things happening now. It's one of the reasons you shouldn't be despondent. In some other reality, Donald Trump got killed the other day, but in this reality, he didn't. Now, you have to wonder, if he didn't get killed in this reality and we avoided a civil war in America that would have had global consequences, is it because we, and in fact, I think I know it is it because of us and people like us manifesting a new reality alongside the previous 9/11 reality where the split originally happened? So there's, don't give up, don't be despondent, don't throw your arms in the air and say all is woe. The power of the human mind, and my, many decades long study into the occult and magic and the power of the mind and the power of creative forces. I'll give you an example, like Trump is, the people who hate Trump, and this will tie in with this video in a while. Now, I'm not saying this is about loving Trump or hating Trump. I'm describing him as an occult phenomena. So don't think I'm waving, the Republican Party flag here. It's nothing like that. I've been fascinated by this man because of his charge and his effect upon certain people. And one of the things, when he was in power, one of the things that happened was they made a giant balloon of him as a baby, and they took it on a world tour. And you had all these liberal types worshiping it. Now, they maybe think they were making fun of it, but they practically created him as a god floating above them and charged all this energy into him. I'm not surprised that those bullets missed him. I'm not surprised, because it's like the classic Oscar Wilde thing. The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Attention goes where energy flows, and there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, the New Agers, they don't have good language for it, but we know with things like quantum retrocausality and the double slit experiment and the observer effect that reality is definitely an optional thing in terms of how you perceive it. And, there definitely seems to be a structural breakdown in the integration of the quantum world at the moment. And this may be part of it. So this, and it's a long-winded introduction to what I'm going to talk about next, but it's important to know where I'm coming from. I'm not coming from a Judeo-Christian background. I'm coming from an Indo-European background. And my influences have been mainly things like quantum, sci-fi, dystopian sci-fi, and cosmic horror. Because I believe that in these worlds, we have seers. I don't believe people like Lovecraft and Colin Wilson, and even Jules Verne going back that far, Arthur Machen, way back, August Derleth, and then up to like Nigel Neal and so on. These people are not just imagining stories out of their heads. To an element, they're seers, and they're conveying the truths of the world in such a way that it would have been done at the Oracle of Delphi, that poems would be said or songs would be sung, prophecies. In the old days, the Druid would sleep under a tree and then produce a satire, a poem. And within those poems and satires, although they were fiction, were truths that you would come to see pass. And that's why that dystopian sci-fi cosmic horror fiction world, it had all this stuff in it. And there's the book that's coming out, myself and Sarah Mondaini has written, called Hocus Focus, which has been, the foreword has been written by Dr. Neil Rushton. We will lay down the case for these things, that the paranormal, the Fortean, the occult, and real life events are intrinsically interlinked through these kinds of floating miasmic ideas that grab on and lock and then create tangents of synchromysticism that manifest in the material world, as exemplified by the chaos sphere behind me, from chaos magic, the idea that there's, I'll put another article below on chaos paganism that I've written that kind of gives an insight into that. And again, I haven't got time to go into this full dissertation of my work, but again, this is about one book I've written that has really affected me. And because I think it's sort of like a culmination of my own work, in that theory fiction is becoming fiction theory. And that it's, instead of saying like, oh wow, wasn't it amazing that Lovecraft predicted this, or even like Rod Serling predicted this, or even Gene Roddenberry wrote this in the story and it came to happen. Rather than saying, we're now entering a paradigm, then rather than saying a fictional work was created, and isn't it amazing how a coincidence happened where it came to pass in real life, that we now must see that in the reverse way, in that a thing happens in real life and it's a result of the chaos fiction that happened in the past, or the theory fiction as it's called now. And because the time isn't linear, they're linked all the time in different directions, forward, backward, up, down. Everything is multi-phased. So you can't, just say, oh, you can't draw a single timeline outside the sort of mortal world that we live in regarding the clock speed of the human brain, which is very, literal for us as we perceive the passage of time. Although it's not really from individual to individual. We're locked into a quantifiable measurement of quantum events that we call the clock and the calendar and so on, 24-hour time, because it helps us to organize the structure of the world around us in this material world that we found ourselves in. So there's a great awakening happening, and you see it in people like Naomi Wolf, and you see it in people like Tucker Carlson, and their audience, judging by the comments that appear on their videos, the awakening is happening there too. Now, I'm not going to say they're wrong, because Naomi Wolf runs back to her sort of her Jewish background. That's fine, no problem there. Or Tucker Carlson runs back to his Christian background, and say like a Muslim might run back to their Islamic heritage of things like the jinn. Fine, no problem with that. The problem is that when you start to think that's the only one, because it's far more complex than that. Now, of course, once you're a good person and you have human decency towards others, and you understand the basic notion that of natural law, that there is a specific intelligence to the universe, and this specific intelligence, has a balance, an accounting, a mechanization system whereby you abide by it, or you'll be made pay your bills at the end of the day somehow, this kind of thing. Even if it alters reality, you'll be made pay the bills. And there are, yes, there's a dark, well, when I say it's dark, I have to explain a bit more on that. There is a predatory force on this planet, at least one overruling force, although there may be many, I'm sure there probably is, but there's one powerful overruling force that has dominated humans since about 100 years, and that is oil. And in this book, Cyclonopedia, the concept is put forward that's not a new one. It showed up in fiction as well. Here we go again in previous fiction, and everything from the X-Files to all kinds of films and stories. Like The Rig, which was a TV series, wasn't very good, but based on that similar idea, that oil is sentient. Now, my late friend, Crane, who was an oil field executive, he was the one who told me this about a decade ago in relation to the Deepwater Horizon rig that exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. And for some reason, just about every major military, the French, the Americans, the British, they were all down there with their most heavy military equipment. And he said the reason was, he says the oil was alive, was the term that he used. The oil appeared to be alive, and they were attacking it or something like that. This is the story. Well, but that was the old line story, that the oil at the Deepwater Horizon that came out was alive. And that's what that cover story of the oil rig explosion was all about. And again, we've heard think black goo and all these things, but this is a very specific theory that this Iranian philosopher has come out with, that the oil is basically a type of Lovecraftian god. And under the extreme pressures of the earth, it formed and became sentient. And it became sentient, and like all gods, it desires to be worshipped. Now, he writes all this stuff in the context of the Middle East, which is his culture. So things like Mesopotamia, Sumeria, and then you have like Islam and Judaism and stuff like this. And he goes a long way to explaining why this tiny part of the world hasn't totally sucked in our focus. A world of like, why is a war between Abrahamic religions? Why is it so important to us? Why in this day and age? You could understand they back in the times of the Crusades, maybe, but once the Crusades ended, there was little or no interest in that part of the world until the discovery of oil, that they discovered after World War II that the region had vast oil reserves. And this is because the oil there wanted to be discovered, because the oil is a kind of a god. Now, before I go into the rest of this book, I want to preface it by saying that Reza Negarestani, if you can pronounce his name, forgive me, Iranians and Persians out there, has basically denounced the book or played it down in recent interviews. And I find that very interesting. Now, at the expense of sounding like John Cleese in The Life of Brian, the true Messiah always denies he's the Messiah. There's every possibility he could have been got to somehow or shut up, or there was lots of negative reviews calling him, a genius who wasted his gift and this kind of thing. And this is because I think, the element of they don't protest too much. And I think there's a lot of There might even be fear. You're tackling something that's quite powerful. The concept of oil and being a sentient Lovecraftian god that lives in the center of the earth. Also, the book is over analytical, over descriptive, over technical as well. And this just seems to me like he's covering his ass or something. So the basic premise is that this oil became sentient, and like all gods, it demands to be worshipped by humans. Now, since the dawn of time, humans have worshipped the sun. Even when they worship things like fire, it was the sun on earth. And it makes sense, it's the giver of life, it produces heat, it's so clearly, obviously there. Now, being a typical of a god of the Middle East, this oil entity, this oil jinn, whatever, Jehovah, whatever you call it, it was jealous of mankind's veneration of the sun, which was generally quite positive. That would be rooted around harvests and this kind of thing, and things like purification rituals, like Beltana here in Ireland, in pagan Ireland, where they would run cattle between two walls of fire to purify them, and these were all solar events and so on. And this entity, this Lovecraftian god entity, oil, black gold, Texas tea, wanted to be worshipped. It wanted to affect humans, and it wanted to create an anti-solar cult on Earth. And one of the ways it did this was in Mexico. Now, I'm showing in my theories as well. If this oil god is true, it would want to besmirch solar worship. It would want to turn humans away from the sun. Well, how would it do that? Everything from telling you the sun gives you cancer to Aztecs cutting the hearts out of people on top of the pyramid of the sun and making sacrifices to keep their ruling class in power. And that's how it would do it. And it would infect these people and make them turn solar worship into something very brutal and very savage. And then as religions like Christianity came along, they would seem like decent alternatives. But that didn't happen in Europe, where to the Mayans and the Aztecs, Christianity seemed like a better choice. Europeans were very happy with the paganism they had before Christianity. And then we also have the thing of the Sol Invictus cult in ancient Rome as well, the idea of the inside sun and the hidden sun, the unknown sun, which also rose again during a Third Reich occultism. Well, we should call it Third Reich. It existed before the Third Reich, Germanic neo-paganism. And so this thing longed to be worshipped and venerated. And so through a combination of all kinds of things, through affecting people, once the combustion engine was created, it had the means to be worshipped. So we were all using oil to heat our homes, light our cities, transport, you name it. And the concept of the car being sold as the American dream and freedom and all these kinds of things, and all these oil families that have appalling histories like the Rockefellers and so on. And this oil then wanted to suck in all our energy by creating endless Middle Eastern wars. Now, that's basically the premise. Okay, oil wanted to be worshipped because it was a jealous Middle Eastern god that was angry that humans were naturally worshipping the sun. So this brings us to today, and this is my overlay on top of that. And my overlay on top of that is I'm very interested now in things like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil as a result. Well, I was already, but even more so now. And we're seeing the beginning of a new solar cult, the putting of solar panels in fields. Now, the human relationship with the sun is not a particularly good one. It may have been why our Indo-European ancestors turned towards animism, because solar worship seems to come with human sacrifice a lot of the time. And when you're worshiping this being up in the sky, this entity up in the sky, you're dehumanizing yourself in many ways. But if you begin like the Indo-Europeans, I'm just using them as an example, not the only ones, and you make it a force of animism where the gods are around you in the trees and the mountains and everything else in the sky and everywhere else, you're among the gods rather than being served, serving below them. This kind of thing. The energetic relationship is very different. So when you see the likes of Extinction Rebellion dressed in those red robes going around and wanting to just stop oil, it's almost like, is this the sun getting back at the oil god on Earth? This is what I'm thinking. Is the sun now trying to form its own solar cult in response to this? Is this why the skies look different? Is this why the color of the sun has changed? Is this in recent times? It's not longer yellow, it's like a bluish white. Is all this stuff, the environmental movement and everything else, the sentient element of the sun going to war against the sentient element of oil? And it's a cosmic battle being fought out within the domain of human consciousness and by extension, the human world as a whole. It's also interesting how many of the paintings that have been attacked by Just Stop Oil have been oil paintings. But that was an interesting one. And this kind of thing. And I even wonder today if some of the global outage on the transportation communications computer networks, digital networks, are they a bug created by something like this? There is a cosmic force behind both. So when you see the likes of Extinction Rebellion dressed in their blood red, scarlet outfits walking around, you're probably seeing like the Planet People in Nigel Neal's Quatermass 4. You're seeing a new religious movement emerging. You're seeing that these are the martyrs of the future. These will be seen as the apostles of the future, and they were persecuted now. And just like Christianity came out of the ruling class of Rome, that's what really brought Christianity into power. The Just Stop Oil thing is coming from the ruling classes of, the West. And this is why knowledge is so important in these times. So you don't fall into either camp. You don't worship no, I'm just saying this is theory fiction. I'm not saying it's literal, but you could use these very powerful metaphors. The oil god could represent capitalism and brutal exploitation of the Earth's resources. The solar god is royalty, it's genocide, it's appeasing. You don't have to do either one. This is why you should be very careful. You shouldn't just automatically jump back to the religion that you were brought up with, but continue to seek enlightenment. So anyway, that's the book. That's not even a review properly, really. It's just telling you what it's about, why I think it's very, very important in this time, and it's great help in my understanding, and also why I think the story is still to be finished off through things like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. They were dealing with, the new version of the thing, but the war in heaven is reflected by the war on earth. And to have a fuller understanding of these things, and not just your Bible or your Torah or your Quran, I think really helps you get through these times in a better way. And that's what I've always tried to achieve on this channel with my videos and my books and everything, is to try to say, hold on a second, step back, just wait a second. Let's look at this from different angles. And it's worked very well for me in my life. And every so often I get an insight. And Cyclonepedia by Raza Nega Astani is one of them. It's not the answer. Nothing is ever the answer. And that may be one of the reasons he's disowned it. He was probably afraid he was going to start some kind of religion or something out of it. Or maybe he was just got to, or maybe he's just a coward, can't stand up by his own work anymore. But it's interesting that he is disowned it as the book has started to reach people like me and others. Interesting, eh? So maybe it was only for a select group within a kind of a priest class or whatever. So there you go. Theory fiction rules the world. Fiction theory rules the world. And all of them are necessary for us to get through this period. So take care, and I'll see you. And check out that article below that I posted.